Hey, my name is Brandy and you're at the Jack Daniel Distillery. I've been an ambassador guide here for about 7.5 years. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much. We look forward to it.
All right, y'all, so this is the rick yard. This is where we make charcoal for the charcoal mellowing process that we do to our whiskey. Charcoal mellowing is what makes us Tennessee whiskey, so that's a pretty important step to making Jack. We do make our own charcoal by hand right here on the property, and the type of wood we use is hard sugar maple. We buy that sugar maple about 30 miles from here, and it's already cut, split, and stacked up like that when we get it in. Those stacks of wood are called ricks. They're gonna be left outside to weather for about 6 months. And then we're gonna take 4 of them and put them up underneath these hoods right here, which is gonna scrub the smoke so we're not releasing anything into the environment, but it still allows us to burn in open air to make our charcoal. And there's definitely an art to that. We only make it as needed. So on average, gonna be about 3 days a week, twice a day. Typically Monday through Friday and early in the morning. So they've already finished their burn this morning. But whenever they get ready to burn, they're gonna start the fire with 140 proof White Lightning moonshine straight off of our still. And we use that as an accelerant because we're making charcoal to filter our whiskey. So if we used anything petroleum-based or gasoline as an accelerant, you would taste it in the whiskey. It burns for about 1.5 hours, gets up to about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have 2 men that work in this department full-time, and their names are Darren and Tracy. Darren and Tracy are gonna wait for the opportunity to put the fire out, and they just grab their water hoses and put it out. It sounds pretty simple, but that's where the art takes place, because if they don't do it right, you get wet unburned wood or a pile of ashes. We need a pile of charcoal. So they're gonna do it just right. Takes them about 30 minutes to put that fire out, and then they're gonna scoop the charcoal up and grind it down to a smaller, more uniform size piece and take it up to our charcoal mellowing room where it's gonna filter the whiskey. So this is the grinder right here. After we've made our charcoal, we're gonna have to bring it into this room, and they're gonna run it through this grinder to make a smaller, more uniform size piece, so it'll actually filter the whiskey. If we were to leave it too big, the whiskey just kind of rolls around the charcoal. The smaller, more uniform size piece is gonna filter the whiskey, which is the whole point of charcoal mellowing, is filtering whiskey. So after they run it through the grinder, it goes up into the tank outside, and it'll sit there until they need to change out mellowing vats. And we've got lots of names on the wall in here. Those have been several of our celebrities and high-profile groups that have come through here, and you're welcome to pick up a piece of charcoal and sign your name on the wall if you'd like to.
Where does it go? You want to write your name?
Not everybody gets to do this, so it's kind of a cool
special
thing. Yeah, just grab you a piece and write your name up there. Just don't write it on my name. See, my name's right here, so.
Okay, so anyone who comes on this tour, make sure you look for this, because I know this guy.
Can't see much about it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to write with it.
You got it.
All
You
right.
got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much.
So this is going to give you an idea of what a charcoal mellowing vat looks like. This one's about the same size around, but the real ones are taller than that. They are 14 feet deep, and they have 10 feet of charcoal hand packed down in there. So it would take them burning 4 times or 16 ricks just to fill one mellowing vat. And we're not changing all 72 out at one time. They're only going to change charcoal out as needed. So sometimes it's like 2 or 3 mellowing vats a week that they would be changing out. The charcoal is going to last in a mellowing vat about a year. And we have whiskey tasters that work at the distillery like myself. Part of my job title is going to the tasting room daily and tasting samples from different mellowing vats. If we determine that the mellowing vat's not working anymore, then Darren and Tracy go up there, they vacuum out the charcoal. They send that used charcoal off to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. There's a company out there that's going to dry it, form it into pellets, or press it into briquettes that are end up sold as Jack Daniel's smoking pellets or Jack Daniel's charcoal briquettes, so they can go in grills and smokers for your food. We're pretty sustainable around here, and you'll kind of learn that along the way, that we don't have very much waste to landfill. But the charcoal, what it's doing for the whiskey, is filtering out oils and acids from the whiskey, so it's kind of calming it down a little bit. And that's the way that Jack was taught how to make whiskey. Just about every distillery in this area back in Jack's day were known to charcoal mellow their whiskey. And the land that we're on today was part of the larger county next door called Lincoln County back in Jack's day. And so this process is known as the Lincoln County process. This process, we say, is what makes us Tennessee whiskey. It's really the difference between making Tennessee whiskey and making bourbon. Tennessee whiskey is required to be charcoal mellowed. Other than that, it follows all of the same strict federal standards that it takes to make bourbon. The only difference is we have to charcoal mellow and they don't. They can if they choose to, and some of them do, but they are not required to, and we are. So that's the only difference between making Tennessee whiskey and making bourbon. And all of our whiskey is going through 10 feet of charcoal. This is before the barrel while the whiskey's clear. We do make a couple of whiskeys that will be double mellowed. They'll go through charcoal twice. Double mellowing is only 2 to 3 feet of charcoal the second time. It's after the barrel, so it takes out spicy flavors and oaky flavors. Most people are more familiar with Gentleman Jack, which we introduced in 1988. That one's double mellowed, but we also have a specialty whiskey called Number 27 Gold that's double mellowed. Everything else just goes through the charcoal the one time. So.
Okay, Brandy, go ahead and tell us about this REO Speedwagon.
So this is a 1928 REO Speedwagon. It's one of our retired fire engines. Most people are familiar with the name REO Speedwagon because of the band, but that is where the band got its name from. REO is actually the founder of the vehicle's initials, and his name was Ransom Eli Olds. He also was the founder of Oldsmobile. So that logo that's on there looks just like the logo that was on the band's album cover. All right, so Jack, he got started making whiskey about 5 miles from here. He was on the Reverend Dan Call farm. Jack was the baby of 10 children, and his mom passed away right after he was born. His dad remarried, and there was always suggestion that maybe Jack didn't get along with his stepmom, so he left home at a young age. He went to live with a Lutheran minister named Dan Call, and Dan, he had a big farm and a general store. He also had a still, and Jack took a lot of interest in that still. This would have all been before the Civil War, so it was before emancipation, and the still was under the watch and care of an enslaved man named Nathan Nearest Green. Well, Nathan Nearest Green took Jack in. He took him under his wing and worked with him side by side every day, and he taught Jack the art of distilling. A few years later, Jack had the opportunity to get the still from Dan Call. And Jack was maybe 13 to 15 years old at the time, and he hired his mentor, Nearest Green, as a free man to be his head distiller, which is what we call a master distiller today. And we'll talk a little bit more about the master distiller thing a little bit later on. But fast forward, Jack and Nearest had been making whiskey on the Call farm all the way up until about 1880. And then Nearest decided he wanted to retire, and I'm sure at that point Jack decided he would go get his own place. So somebody told him about land here, and he come to check it out. He was looking for a water source to make whiskey. Found one so good on this property that we still get to use it today. So we're going to head back to that water source now. So this water runs 56 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. It comes from an underground spring, which is located in a limestone cave. The water hits the limestone and it picks up minerals that contribute to the taste of whiskey, but it leaves out the iron, which would make the whiskey taste bad. It would turn it black. Jack knew all of those things because of the way he was taught, so he saw this as an opportunity and settled his still right here at the mouth of the cave. He started using the water to mill grains and make mash, which is pretty much what we use the water for today. We really haven't changed a lot about the way we've made whiskey since Jack was here. Of course, we make a lot more whiskey than what Jack did, but we are still using the same water source. Jack had his whole operation just sitting right here where we're standing, and none of it fits back here anymore, so we're pumping the water from the spring. The pump system is just back behind that man-made dam. So we're going to pull the water from there, and we send it up to our cookers, and we'll use the water to cook our grain, which we do talk a little bit more about here in a minute. The water's never gone dry on us, and we hope it never will. So if you had Jack your whole entire lifetime, you've tasted the water. We've used it every day the same way since Jack was back here making whiskey off of it in the 1800s. So this building that we're in is the only building left from when Jack was here. This is his old office. It makes total sense that he would have built his office here because he made all of his whiskey just right out there at the cave spring. He started making whiskey out there probably about 1881, and he made whiskey back there all the way up until 1909 when state prohibition hit Tennessee. This county wasn't dry back then, so Jack had 2 saloons on the town square, the Red Dog and the White Rabbit. So he had to shut his saloons down and shut his distillery operations down, and his health was failing because of an incident that took place right here in this office. Jack wasn't always the first person to work in the mornings. He would normally get his nephew Lem Motlow to come in early and open everything up. But one morning Jack got here early and he was before everybody else, so he went to open this safe right here. I don't know if he forgot the combination or what, but he couldn't get it open and that frustrated him. So he kicked this 1,200-pound cast iron safe as hard as he could and broke his toe. He didn't go to the doctor right away, so by the time he got there, he found out gangrene had set up and they had to cut his toe off. And then infection set up, started to spread so much, they eventually amputated his leg all the way up to his hip, trying to save his life. And 6 years after kicking this safe, at only 61 years old, Jack died from complications. And all of those complications started right here in this room with that early morning mistake. I grew up around here, so the first time I heard that story, I was a child. Taught me to never show up to work early because it killed Jack, it could kill me, and I don't want to take chances like that. It's not worth it. So Jack died in 1911, no wife, no children. He left the distillery to his nephew, Lem Motlow. Now, Lem was the bookkeeper, and he was a very smart businessman, so he moved whiskey around from state to state where it was still legal until national prohibition hit in 1919. Then Lem shut everything down, but he paid bills on the property because he didn't think national prohibition was going to last as long as it did. It lasted till 1933. He still couldn't make whiskey. Tennessee remained a dry state after national prohibition. And they did allow votes on county ballots to vote wet or dry, but you would need at least 2,500 registered voters in a county to get the vote on the ballot. More counties never had 2,500 registered voters in this county, so we are still dry today because of that. So Lem, he ran for public office and he got elected. He ended up on state legislature and proposed a bill. He said if he couldn't sell whiskey in a dry county, let him make it in one. He would sell it to places that are legal, generate revenue for the state, and pay tax dollars, and he got that bill passed. So Lem opened up in 1938. We had been shut down for 29 years, and pretty much the only thing left was Jack's old office in the Cave Spring. Lem was getting close to 70 years old, but he rebuilt everything on the property and started over from scratch. He died less than 10 years later in 1947. So Lem left the distillery to his 4 adult sons, the Motlow brothers. They owned it till 1956, and then the business was taken off just a little bit faster than what they were prepared to keep up with, and I'm sure some of that had to do with Frank Sinatra calling our whiskey the nectar of the gods. There were a lot of companies that wanted to buy the distillery, but they decided to sell to someone that they already had a relationship with, which was Brown-Forman out of Louisville, Kentucky. And Brown-Forman is still our parent company today. The Motlow family sold to them in 1956. They are still headquartered up in Louisville, Kentucky.
Do you know what they sold it for?
$20 million.
$20 million.
In 1956.
Oh, well, that was a lot of money in 1956.
Yeah, that's a lot of money now, but back then, if you were to do it in today's money, dollar for dollar, what that felt like to them would be about $185 million today. Of course.
And still far short of what it's really worth.
Yes. So Brown-Forman, they don't just own the Jack Daniel distillery, they do own quite a few other wineries and distilleries. So these are photos of current and past master distillers that we've had throughout the year. The master distiller is going to be the person to oversee the entire whiskey making operation from start to finish, so that's a pretty big job title. Our first master distiller was Nathan Nearest Green, the man that taught Jack how to make whiskey. Unfortunately, we do not have a photo of him, so this is the closest thing that we have. Jack Daniel is standing right in the middle of the photo, and he had it made probably somewhere around 1904. Back then, if you sat next to the owner of a business, you were an important person. The person sitting right next to Jack is George Green, and that is the son of Nearest Green. When Nearest retired, he sent his 2 sons to work along the side of Jack, so George is going to represent his dad. Nathan Nearest Green is our first master distiller. After him would have been our founder, Jack Daniel. Jack's nephew, Jess Motlow, which is Lem Motlow's brother. Jack's great-nephew, Lem Tolley, Jess Gamble, Frank Bobo, Jimmy Bedford, Jeff Arnett, and now our current master distiller, Chris Fletcher. This transition just took place a couple of weeks ago. Jeff stepped down from the position at the end of September, and then they announced our assistant master distiller, Chris Fletcher, as our master distiller. But I will tell you, I personally think that Chris was probably born for the job. He grew up in Lynchburg and spent a lot of time at the distillery as a kid. His grandparents had retired from here, and he went to college a couple of hours from here and would come home and tour guide on the weekends and the summers. He ended up working at, after college, working at Brown-Forman in the research and development department, and another distillery for a couple of years, and the job title of assistant master distiller came open, and he applied for it and he came home. His hire date was the exact same day as his grandfather's hire date, 60 years apart, and I don't think that that was planned. His grandfather is retired master distiller Frank Bobo. For the last 6 years, Chris has had the same office as his grandfather and the same desk as his grandfather. Frank passed away at the beginning of the year, and at that time, they didn't know that Jeff would be retiring from the position and that Chris would be our new master distiller. So I kind of think that maybe things happened the way that they were supposed to happen. And we do have a lot of generational workers like that here at the distillery, and I personally think that that's what makes the company unique. We've got quite a few employees that have had grandparents and parents work here. Some of them have that working along the side of them today, like myself. My mom works here, so I'm second generation. I do have an adult son working at the distillery now, so we have 3 generations in our family working here right now. But there's a lot of 4th and 5th generation workers around here, like Jerome Vance. Him and his 2 sisters, Debbie and Jackie, they are 5th generation employees, and they are the great-great-grandchildren of Nathan Nearest Green. And from the day that Jack hired Nearest Green all the way to now, there always has been members of the Green family working at the distillery. It makes me proud to know that a long time ago we learned family was going to be a good means of quality control, because grandparents and parents would do the best they can to hand work down. We would do the best we can to make them proud. All right, so this is our grain mill. We have 12 silos here. They give us about 16 hours of run time, so we have to get our grain trucks in every day. Our grains are corn, barley, and rye, and the recipe is 80% corn, 12% malted barley, and 8% rye. That recipe makes every product that we have in the market except for the rye whiskey that we're doing now, which is 70% rye, 18% corn, 12% malted barley. These grains come in here every day. We grind them up. We add the cave spring water to cook them, and then we mix them all together, and we add yeast. That mixture is called mash. We are going to take from a previous batch of mash, we add to a new batch of mash, and we help kickstart the yeast. The mash will sit in a fermenter for about 4 days. The yeast will eat up the sugar from the corn and turn it to alcohol. Well, by the time we use the mash, it's going to be about 12% alcohol, which is called sour mash. And we distill sour mash to make whiskey. So we'll move on down and talk about distillation. Okay, so this is our distillery building, and in here we have 4 stills. Our stills are 100% copper. They're column style, continuous flow, and they're over 40 foot tall. They go all the way up to the top of that building. We're gonna pump our mash all the way up to the top. The mash will spill down over copper plates inside the still, and steam will rise from the bottom. The steam boils the alcohol out of the mash as a vapor, and we capture that alcohol vapor. We cool it, condense it, and turn the vapor back to liquid. That liquid is 140 proof, 70% alcohol, white lightning, moonshine, whatever you want to call it. We do have 2 larger stills, and each one of those are running on average about 35 to 40 gallons of whiskey per minute. The smaller ones are about 12 to 18 gallons of whiskey per minute. We do make whiskey 7 days a week. And when we're distilling, we're pumping our mash up through our still. It's gonna take 5 gallons of mash just to make 1 gallon of whiskey. So what we're doing is we're separating the alcohol off the mash. And we pull that alcohol off the mash is done, and we could throw it away. But we are 99% sustainable here. We have less than 1% waste to landfill. So we will not throw mash away. We're gonna sell it cheap to local farmers, and they feed it to their livestock, which I say is why we have happy cows and pigs in Lynchburg. So when the whiskey comes off of the still, that's when it's time to go through the charcoal mellowing process. Our charcoal mellowing building is the building that's right up here on the hillside. There's 72 mellowing vats in there, and they're all 14 feet deep with 10 feet of charcoal hand-packed down in there. That whiskey is going to be gravity fed through 10 feet of charcoal. It's going to come out clear and 140 proof. So the whiskey comes out of charcoal mellowing, and that's when we put it into a barrel. The barrel is an ingredient for the whiskey. It gives us all of the color and most of the flavor. We do have cooperages that make barrels for us, and one is the original one in Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. It's the Brown-Forman cooperage. The other is in Trinity, Alabama. It's called the Jack Daniel cooperage. So we don't make our barrels here on the property, which in a minute we're going to watch a video. It'll show you how they're made. But the barrels, they have been toasted to release the natural sugar from the white oak, and then it's charred to caramelize the sugar and kind of seal it in. We're going to put clear whiskey inside of a barrel, and the barrel is going to go up to a barrel house that's not climate controlled. So whatever the weather's like outside, it will affect the weather inside. And when it gets hot, the wood pores inside the barrel are going to expand. And so that would draw whiskey down into the white oak, which you can see this dark line. That's a whiskey soak line. That's how deep the whiskey is going to go in there. But when it's cold, the wood pores are going to tighten back up, and it'll push the whiskey back out into the barrel. So a barrel is going to sit in a barrel house 4 to 7 years. It's like the barrel is breathing. It's pulling whiskey in and out. That's how we get all the color and most of the flavor. And because of that, we can only use our barrel one time. If we tried to use it a second time, it would be like using a tea bag the second time. You don't get as much color or flavor from the second use. After one use, we sell our barrels, and the majority of them are going to Scotland for Scotch. They'll go to the Caribbean for rum, to Mexico for tequila, wineries, breweries, other distilleries all over the world. Some of them go to McElhenney Tabasco Company out of Avery Island, Louisiana. We also sell our barrels to the public, and we do have a store down on the town square called the Barrel Shop, where you can buy used whiskey barrels and all kinds of furniture made out of used whiskey barrels. But for us, they're only good for one time.
The people that use your barrels to make other kinds of liquor, did they actually mention that they were Jack Daniels?
Some of them do, yeah.
I think I've seen that.
I personally have never been to like Scotland or Ireland, but I've heard several people that have been to distilleries there where they specifically say we get our barrels from the Jack Daniel distillery.
Right. I've seen that as well.
Yep. So this building right here is one of our bottling lines. Most of our bottling is done about a mile up the road. That's where the majority of our barrel houses are. That's where we ship all of the whiskey from. The only whiskey that we don't bottle down at that facility is a whiskey that we call single barrel. Single barrel whiskeys are bottled one barrel at a time. No two barrels produce the exact same taste. So if we're trying to make whiskey taste consistent, like Old No. 7, we're going to mingle barrels together and kind of make it in batches to keep it consistent. Whereas single barrel, we would hand select barrels from the top floor of our barrel house. We would bottle it one barrel at a time, and however many bottles come off that one barrel, that's it. There's never going to be another barrel in the world that tastes like that particular one. So we do put labels around the neck of the single barrel bottles by hand, and it gives you the barrel number. If you go to a liquor store, you buy 2 bottles of single barrel that come from 2 different barrels, it would taste totally different. So single barrel is time consuming. A lot of labels are put on by hand. It's one barrel at a time. That's why we bottle it separate from the rest of our whiskey. Okay, so this is one of our barrel houses. This one was built in 1938. This one is the oldest and smallest that we have. It's 3 stories tall, and it used to hold over 6,000 barrels of whiskey in it. We have renovated this barrel house. We actually divided it into 2 sections. The first section that we're going to be going into is what we call the live section. We are actively maturing whiskey in there. There's several hundred barrels in there that are full of whiskey. The oldest barrels that are in there right now are a little over 2 years old. The youngest ones are 3 days old. So it will smell a little like whiskey when we walk in there. That smell is called angel share, and angel share is evaporation from a barrel. We lose about 20% of a barrel due to evaporation. So we pay our taxes on whiskey when we bottle, not when we put it in a barrel, because we don't really want to pay taxes on whiskey that don't exist. So I always encourage everybody to breathe deep and enjoy as much of it as you can. All right, so we hand roll our 500-pound barrels of whiskey into a barrel house, and whatever floor we put them on, that's where we keep them. We're not going to come back in here and rotate barrels or move them from floor to floor. They really just sit right where they are for 4 to 7 years. The weather, where it's stored in a barrel house, which barrel house it's stored in, that's all going to have an effect on how long it takes. And we know it takes at least 4 years, so we would taste it at 4 years. But we judge it on taste, color, and smell to determine if it is mature enough to bottle. We don't age whiskey, we mature it, and that's kind of like people. You know, you could have two people the same age but not the same maturity level. You could have two barrels the same age but not the same maturity level. And that's because down here on the bottom floor, it's going to be colder year round. This is more like a basement or a cellar, so you wouldn't get as much of that interaction going in and out, and it could take longer to mature whiskey on the bottom floor. It could have a lighter color and less mature taste, but heat rises, so the further up you go, the more interaction you're going to get. On the top floor, you would end up with a more rich, bold, and robust taste in whiskey, which is why I said earlier, if we have whiskey like single barrel that we bottle one barrel at a time, it comes from the top floors only. But everything else that we're making, we're taking barrels, different floors, different barrel houses, and we mingle together so that we can keep it consistent. That's how we make Old Number 7. It takes about 175 barrels to make a batch of Old Number 7. And then once we have Old Number 7 in batches, we can use it as the starting point to make a lot of other whiskeys like Gentleman Jack and Tennessee Honey and Tennessee Fire, Tennessee Apple. Old Number 7 is a starting point for a lot of whiskeys that we make. Of course, now we have rye whiskey, which is different from the beginning. We do have a single barrel rye, and we have a consistent flavor called Tennessee Straight Rye. We have a few small batch rye whiskeys, but most everything that we make is made off of our traditional corn recipe, just like Jack always did.
Well, this ends our tour. Brandy, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for all the information. It was intriguing. I've known a lot about Jack Daniel's, but nowhere near what I learned today. And it was an honor to be shown around. Hiro-san, are you ready to make the best teriyaki sauce with some Jack?
Yes.
You gotta think of single barrel, double barrel, or Gentleman Jacks, or something delicious.
And send me some when you do, so I can taste it.
Yes, for sure.
Make sure it's good. We're glad to have y'all. Thank y'all for stopping by. It was an honor to have you on tour. Hope y'all come back and see us again sometime and use our product.
You'll see for sure. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Have a good day. It was very nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Hiro-san, what a treat. Look around. This is history. We're here and so privileged to be with Mr. Chris Fletcher, and he is a master distiller here at Jack Daniel's. And what I've learned is there's only one at a time, correct?
That's right, one at a time anyway.
Right. Well, you were in a very special position. You know, we love Jacks. I was telling Brandy, our tour guide, earlier that my first experience with alcohol was Jack and Coke. I think a lot of people as well. But please, we'd love to hear your story. Tell us about yourself and how you came to this position and how you started and all that.
Sure. Well, I grew up here in Lynchburg, and in fact, my parents' house is just up the road, about 5 minutes away. And my grandfather was our master distiller here for about 23 years as master distiller, and worked here over 30 years in total. He started working here in 1957 and retired in 1989 as our master distiller. So when I was a kid, I was around the distillery. In fact, here in the office, his old office is my office now. It's a pretty special thing to be our distiller and kind of follow in his steps. It's kind of a story of luck, though. Really, I never really wanted or set out to be a distiller. As a young person, when I was here with my grandfather, I was really young, 6 or 7 years old, and obviously didn't know what whiskey was even. But I went away to school, and in college I studied chemistry and was kind of unsure of what I wanted to do with that, and got a summer job here after my second year in school, and that's when I started to think that chemistry and whiskey, and learned about the science behind the process. And of course I had my grandfather to help me understand that even better. And so really one thing led to the next, and when I finished with school, there was an opening in our research and development department, and so I started as a chemist there, and spent almost 9 years in R&D and doing some other work as a chemist within the whiskey industry. And had the opportunity to come back home in 2014 and as the assistant master distiller, and just recently have been named master distiller. So very lucky and really fortunate. It's a very special thing for me to be able to be here with our team. We've got some of the best whiskey makers in the world here in Lynchburg, and our town and our families of Lynchburg have been making whiskey here. Mine is just one of many that have a family connection here, and people go to work every day with family members here and neighbors and friends. And Lynchburg's a pretty small place, and we're the second smallest county in the state of Tennessee. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff that we don't have here in Lynchburg. It's a small town, and There's not a whole lot to do, maybe some people would think, but we're pretty good at doing one thing, and that's make whiskey.
Right.
And so the families of Lynchburg take a lot of pride in that, and take a lot of pride in knowing that our whiskey goes all over the world now, and people can enjoy it. So
right.
It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, you're kind of sitting in the Oval Office, I wouldn't say, but your term is in 4 years. You have as many years as you want, basically.
I hope so. I hope I have a lot more years to go.
Yeah. Tell us about, I know this is a dry county, so people wanted to buy Jack. People like locals wanted to buy Jack. Where would they get it from? How far would that to drive?
You can buy some of our products here at our gift shop in the visitor center.
Okay.
So that's the only spirits that's allowed to be sold in the whole county.
I see.
It's nothing by the drink. You can't buy any alcohol by the drink here. However, there are beer and wine sales here. So it's a little confusing. It's a little tricky. So there are some alcohol sales here, but no hard spirits other than our gift shop. But the fun fact is every town around us is wet, so it doesn't matter what direction you drive out of town, you'll be able to find our product.
Right. And another question. When's the first time you had your first sip of Jack? Do you remember?
I don't really remember the first time I had
Probably
Jack
too young.
Daniels.
Your grandfather was
I think I was about 21. So.
For real? Here, you have any questions for Chris?
I have one question. What's the best way to drink Jack Daniel? And also, what's your favorite way to drink
Great
Jack
question.
Daniel?
Okay. Well, my favorite way is typically just with a couple cubes of ice. I like the ice just to melt just a little bit for a couple of minutes. And I think just that little bit of dilution will kind of sweeten the whiskey a little bit. I do like it, just slightly chilled. I don't keep whiskey in a freezer or in a refrigerator or anything like that, but just 1 or 2 ice cubes just to slowly melt, I think is my favorite way to enjoy it. But there's really no wrong way to enjoy Jack Daniels. I think that's one of the great things about our whiskey is the balance of flavor. There's sweet, there's a lot of oak and smoke, and from the charred oak barrel, there's a little bit of spice to the whiskey as well. So you have all these different flavors that balance themselves, and that really, I think that's kind of one of the secrets that makes Jack Daniels so well liked all over the world, is because of that balance of flavor. And people can make great cocktails. Certainly any whiskey based cocktail, an old fashioned, a Manhattan, any of those are fantastic with Jack Daniels. Some people love it with Coke, and so that's one of the most popular calls in the world, really, Jack and Coke, which is, of course, was invented just right down the road here, a few hours away in Georgia. So, two products from the south of the United States, which has become this kind of global cocktail. So, long story short, I'd say the only way that I would recommend it to drink it would be responsibly. Other than that, however you like to mix it, however you like to enjoy it, by all means.
Sure. Now, how many chemists work here? I know you mentioned there you applied for a job here. Mm-hmm. How many positions are there for like a chemist?
Well, I worked, when I started here, it was in the R&D lab, my first full-time job here, which our research and development department is located in Louisville, Kentucky. We're part of the Brown-Forman Corporation. And I don't know how many total are in R&D now. I want to say there's about 30 total. And so there would be engineers, chemists, there would be sensory scientists, so the people that would help set up the tasting labs and the people that would come in and taste the spirits for quality, microbiologists as well. So it was really a pretty diverse group of scientists that we have in our R&D lab. And so I imagine there's still probably around that many today.
Mm-hmm. Just sitting here with you, I realize that your position is super important. You're responsible for global product and all that. Give our viewers an idea. Obviously, there's only one of you here. What does your job entail? Like, what do you have to do on the day-to-day? What is probably the most important job you have, and maybe not as important, but that you still have to make the decision on?
Sure. Well, the Master Distiller's hat and role is really, pretty broad now. Back in my grandfather's day, we really didn't even use the term Master Distiller. I think it's just kind of evolved into that pretty name over the years. He was called Head Distiller or simply just Stiller or whatever. And so, after the whiskey was made and put in the barrel, he was pretty hands-off at that point. Today, I would say that the Master Distiller role is really more of a quality control function. And so all the quality organization is my responsibility, and we've got a great quality team here, a lot of great people, again, a lot of great scientists that work on our team, and engineers that basically from grain all the way to glass, to the bottle, our team is looking at every aspect of the production processes and making sure that the consistency and the flavors of the whiskey don't change. And so I would say that's certainly a number one priority.
Do you have any new product coming down the line?
Yeah, innovation is a big piece of it now. American whiskey is probably enjoying its most popular time ever in the history of our industry, and so with that comes, the whiskey consumers' desire to try new and different things and different flavors that we can create. And so innovation is really near the top of my list as well. I really enjoy it. It's not very common really in our industry that you can get to really do new things, especially here at Jack Daniel's, because our traditional Old No. 7 whiskey was allocated for decades here in the United States alone. In fact, we didn't export any bottles of our product until the mid-1980s. Simply because we couldn't keep up with the U.S. demand.
Okay.
And so innovation is right there, and we can control the process from grain all the way to making our own barrels. We have our own stave mills where we're contracting with the loggers that harvest the trees, the oak trees. And so, anything in between, we have our own people and our own hands on the product.
Right.
And so that, our capability, we're really fortunate to have that. And to have those people in all phases of producing the whiskey that we can try. So we can try new grains, we can try different things with distillation, we can try new barrel techniques. There's all kinds of different things that we've tried and done. And so we're going to continue to push forward with that because we know that if people are really interested in trying new offerings from Jack Daniel's, and as the distiller, it's just a lot of fun, just to be honest, to be able to do new and different things.
Right. Anything down the pipeline that you can hint to? Anything new?
We've just recently in the last few years, the newest things we have are our rye whiskey that we started making. So rye whiskey was the earliest form of American whiskey. We introduced our versions of rye whiskey just a couple years ago. And so we're very happy with that. It's really, started to get a kind of a cult following, I call it, here in the U.S. and has a really great kind of spicier twist on the traditional Jack Daniel's flavor. And then we've also, gotten some flavored whiskeys out now. We have a new apple flavored Jack Daniel's, which really harkens back to some of the early times of our distillery after Prohibition, where we made apple brandy. And so it's really kind of coming full circle. At that time, the Motlow family not really being able to just age all the whiskey as long as they needed, so they started making brandy, something that they could sell much more quickly here. And so the old apple brandy, who would know that years, 80, 70, 80 years later, we would be back in to an apple product. And so our new Tennessee apple is the classic Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 whiskey that we blend with an apple liqueur that we do in-house, with all natural apple flavoring, which is really, really nice because you really get that kind of tart, fresh, crisp apple, and then you get the whiskey finish on the back end. Really great product. So those are our two newest, and we're really excited about them.
Okay. Can't wait to try that. Chris, what a treat, huh?
Yes.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much again, Chris, for having us. We can't wait to show you what we can do with the whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
thank you so much.
Great things for you to know. And thank you so much for your time. And we'll hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely, guys. Thanks for coming.